Hello everyone, welcome to this new episode of our vlog series. My name is Karol Rutkowski. I'm a PhD candidate at the Center for Law and Economics at ETH. I'm very happy to be here today with Professor Murat Mungan, with whom we'll be speaking about some crucial assumptions behind empirical approaches to judicial decision making. Murat Mungan is a professor of law at the Texas A&M University School of Law and currently a visiting professor at the Center for Law and Economics at ETH. In his writing, he's been exploring various topics in theoretical law and economics. Lately, he's been looking into methodological approaches in social sciences. Presumptions, Symmetry, and Judges' design falls into this category, and this is his ongoing work that we'll be talking about today. Welcome, Murat.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be here. Always a pleasure to talk about research.
Thanks lots. We're very happy to have you here. That's an honor. Before we talk about the contents of your ongoing work, I have to ask you about some background and motivations for it. So this is a theoretical work, but it is very important to empirical research on judicial decisions. Why?
Yeah, so this article is about an empirical method called the Judges' design. And there are some theoretical underpinnings of this method. In particular, this method was devised to address problems that existed with prior empirical approaches. So it's meant to solve some problems, but it relies on some conditions for it to work unproblematically. And testing whether these conditions hold is empirically very challenging due to lack of data that is needed to test whether these conditions hold. So this raises the importance of having some theoretical understanding of whether the conditions that are necessary for this method to work are plausible, whether these conditions are plausible. So that's basically what drove me into studying this, to figure out whether these conditions make theoretical sense, to come up with a model to study these conditions. That's basically the background.
Okay, thanks a lot for the background. So yeah, you already mentioned the model. So you construct a model of a judge taking a decision. Can you tell us a bit more about the model? Is it a standard model? Do you have to take some specific assumptions?
Sure. I mean, I'd say this is a very standard model. It's decision-making under uncertainty. So there's judges who are assigned some cases and they want to make decisions that accurately reflect the type of case. For instance, a hypothetical situation you could consider, there's a judge who wants to figure out whether a person is guilty or innocent, a defendant who is guilty or innocent. In many jurisdictions, the judge might not make this call, but for our purposes, we could use this as an example, a hypothetical example. So in those cases, the judge would want to find the person guilty, return a verdict of guilty only when the person is in fact guilty. But they don't have the necessary information to make this call. So they have to operate under uncertainty. So what do? They look at the evidence that's in front of them and they make a decision. So I model this situation, this decision-making situation, through what you might call a Bayesian decision-making problem. The judge receives some evidence. Based on that evidence, they update their belief using what's called Bayes' rule to assign a probability with which the case falls into one category or the other, and then they make a decision. That's the simple model that I use to come up with all the conclusions that's in the paper. So I'd say this is a very fairly standard model in economics.
So you're focusing on one specific condition of average monotonicity. can you give us some intuition behind it, and why could it be violated?
Sure. So to clarify, average monotonicity is one of the conditions that's necessary for the judge's design method to work properly, right? Maybe to explain what it means, to explain average monotonicity, it makes sense to put it in the context of the evolution of this literature. So initially, when people were using the judge's design, this assumption or condition of average monotonicity didn't exist. There was a stricter condition called what might now be called traditional monotonicity or strict monotonicity. And that assumption or condition is more intuitive than average monotonicity. So let me start by explaining that, and then we can use that as a starting point to discuss average monotonicity. So strict monotonicity basically says, again, let's go back to the hypothetical example where a judge is making a guilty or an innocent decision. Suppose you and I are judges, and you are a more strict judge than I am because I'm a very lenient person. So you're the strict judge, which means that you like to convict more often. So suppose that historically you've been convicting at a rate of 80%. Among all the defendants that you receive, you've convicted 80% of them, and I've convicted, say, 50% of them. Then we'd say that you are a stricter judge than I am because you convict more often. So strict monotonicity basically says that if you were assigned a defendant and you acquitted them, then I, as the more lenient judge, must have certainly acquitted them. So there's a strict ranking of judges in terms of what they would do to each particular defendant, and that's the assumption of strict monotonicity. Now, people realize that this assumption could be violated quite frequently, and very recently a new assumption was found, or people came up with it, to replace strict monotonicity, and that's what's called average monotonicity. It's a little less intuitive, so explaining it might require a little more imagination. But it basically says this: for any particular subject defendant, in our previous hypothetical example, the likelihood with which they would be convicted co-moves with the strictness of the judge. So if you were to hypothetically move this defendant around judges, starting from the least strict to the most strict, as you move him up, on average, his likelihood of being convicted would go up. So a kind of correlation, if you will, between the strictness of judges and the likelihood of each defendant being convicted. That's the assumption of average monotonicity. Why would it be violated? This is harder to explain, but I'll give it my best shot. So let's go back to the example that I gave you. I'm convicting at a rate of 50-50. You're convicting at a rate of 80%. Why is that happening? Perhaps I'm a terrible judge or a very lazy judge, and I like to toss coins when people come into my courtroom, and that's how I decide. So I'm as good as a fair coin toss. So I have no skill whatsoever in judging people, right? That's why my conviction rate is 50-50. But you're a more skilled person, and let's assume that most of the defendants that come to the court are in fact guilty, and therefore you are more accurate in decision making. And let's say your probability of convicting a guilty person is 90%, and your probability of acquitting an innocent person is also 90%. So you're much more accurate than I am. And that's why you end up convicting 80% of the people, because most of the people are in fact guilty. Now, in this case, you would see that an innocent person, as they move from the more lenient judge, me, they have a probability of being convicted of 50%. As they move towards you, their probability of being convicted goes down to 10%, but you are a stricter judge. This is a type of violation of monotonicity, and if you have multiple judges whose behavior is similarly related, then you would also have a violation of average monotonicity. So this is basically how average monotonicity could get violated.
Then, like, the main result that you're able to present in your work is that under fairly general conditions or assumptions, like average monotonicity is violated, and these fairly general assumptions are that the judges hold no presumptions, and that they have symmetrical information. And like, what do these conditions mean, and what is the significance of the result itself?
So to be fair, I don't want to characterize these conditions as being very general in an empirical sense. I don't want to claim that these conditions hold very frequently or anything like that. I don't know whether they hold very frequently or not. This is an empirical question, but they are intuitive conditions. And I'm going to try to explain what these conditions are. So basically, there's two concepts that are important: presumptions, as well as the symmetry of the evidence-generating process. So presumptions refer to what a judge would do if they received no information whatsoever about the case that they received. So this is a fairly simple idea. So suppose that, going back to our example, suppose that we are both in court and we have no idea about the case specifics, and we're only told that there's a defendant. And we're asked, what do you expect will happen? Do you think you're going to convict this guy or acquit this guy? Or if we gave you no more evidence, what would you do right now? Would you convict this guy or acquit this guy? If I am indifferent, then that means I hold no presumptions. If I tell you that I would rather convict this guy, then I have a presumption of convicting this person. Or you might say I have a presumption of guilt. If I'd rather acquit this guy, then you might say I hold a presumption of innocence, right? And the presumption of innocence is the most commonly known presumption in the legal system. It exists in the criminal context. But in short, presumptions refer to what a judge would do if they had no information about the case characteristics. That's what it means. Now, information generation symmetry, or the symmetry of the evidence generating process, that's harder to explain. It's a less intuitive concept, but I will try my best. So that relates to the idea of information being generated similarly under the two states of the world that could exist. In the previous example, we said that the person might either be guilty or innocent, right? So the symmetry assumption would be that evidence regarding or evidence indicating that the person is guilty is distributed similarly when the person is in fact guilty to how it would be distributed in favor of pointing in the direction of innocence if the person were innocent. So in these two states of the world that could exist, the information is generated similarly in that state's favor. So it's a slightly less intuitive concept, but I should say that it is assumed very frequently in economics. Anytime we assume, for instance, that there's two types and they emit signals through what are called normal distributions with equal variances, but different means, that means that the information generation process is symmetric. And there are many other examples that you can think of where we implicitly assume symmetry of evidence generation. So these are the two concepts that I bring into the model and show that as long as the evidence generating process is symmetric and judges have either no presumptions or fairly weak presumptions, then average monotonicity will be violated.
So you're able to show that under these conditions, the condition of average monotonicity is violated. What does it mean for researchers? What can they learn from this? Also, what does it mean for the studies, empirical studies that were already done?
As I said in the beginning of our conversation, so in order to ensure that the method called the judge's design works properly, it has been assumed that average monotonicity holds. It's hard to check whether this condition holds. Here's a theory that suggests that under certain conditions, average monotonicity will systematically fail. So this suggests that we cannot rely on this assumption. We cannot take this assumption for granted, and we should probably look for ways to test it better, or alternatively to replace average monotonicity with an alternative assumption that we could use in these types of designs, or something to that effect. So The objective here is to show in what ways this assumption can fail, to inspire other researchers to figure out ways to replace this assumption, or to use other methods that do not require this assumption. So just as strict monotonicity was replaced with average monotonicity because people have pointed out problems with strict monotonicity, I'm pointing out some problems with average monotonicity in the hopes that people can think of innovative methods to overcome these problems. I'd say that's the primary takeaway from this paper.
Thanks a lot, Murat, for being with us today and for clarifying your theoretical paper.
Thank you. It's been great. It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks very much.
And to our vlog listeners, we hope you enjoyed this episode as much as we did, and hopefully see you again next time.